Welcome to the Maker's Playbook, the podcast where we talk all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes-Kara. This week, I'm talking with Emilie of Twinette Pottery. Before we dive in, you may have noticed we didn't have a new episode last week. That's because this little podcast is published 3 out of every 4 weeks. On that 4th week, I send out my top photography tips specifically geared towards ceramicists and makers to the folks on my email insider list. If you didn't get this month's photography tip, then be sure to click the link in the notes below this episode, found inside any of your main podcast players, and subscribe to the list so you don't miss out on the next tip. But enough about photography for now. In this chat with Emilie, we talk about the pros and cons of working out of a shared studio versus now her own home space, and the ways to utilize both your own personal website and Etsy for the different benefits they each present. Let's get to it. Hey, Emilie, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you, and I think it's so funny because we're all of 45 minutes apart from each other and yet calling each other over the internet.
That's so true. I really miss the city. I have a lot of friends and my brothers in the city, and I just staying home.
As we all should be doing. That is the right thing. So I know you from our community studio here in Chicago that you used to be at, but for people who don't know you, who don't know Twinette Pottery, give us the 3,000-foot view of who you are and how you got to today.
Yeah, it really all did start with Lincoln Square Pottery Studio, or Lincoln Square Center, Learning Center, and Pottery Studio. Thank you. I had moved to the city. I was mostly focused on painting, and me and my friend decided to take a pottery class just for fun. And it became such an amazing just community for me, and a place where there was a lot of encouragement. And I developed a pottery style, and before I knew it, people were asking to purchase the work. And that was really funny because I had been working as a painter. I went to school for painting. Like, it was very serious for me, and my hobbies became more and more a bigger part of my life. And it just, I wouldn't say it took off, because it's been like I've been inching towards going full time, and then COVID threw me into full time actually. But yeah, it just was following the next step. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, totally.
It wasn't totally planned, that's for sure.
And when was your first class at our community studio?
I think it was almost 10 years ago now.
Oh,
and I would do a session, and then I would fall into ceramics and get really obsessed with it. And then I was serving tables this whole time too. So I had maybe 4 or 5 days a week in restaurants. So then I'd be like head over heels into pottery, but I wasn't ready to give up painting. So I would then take like a session or 2 off and focus on paintings, and then I would take another class. So I was in and out for a couple years.
Were you making painting the goal to be the full-time job, or what did painting look like during that time?
That's interesting, because I was starting to make maybe paintings that would be more accessible, but looking back on it, I think that I was really painting for myself. I was not painting for an audience. I made there was a lot of self-portraiture, and then a lot of nudes. I took so many figure drawing classes in college. I just love like the human figure. It did develop my skills in just gestural line work, which I still use a lot of, but now I do more nature-themed paintings. Yeah. So yeah, it's weird. But I was in my 20s. I never took a business class. Like, an art business is so different, and I think I was like a little bit, like, I knew how much I loved art and I loved doing it, but I didn't really understand. And like I say, I moved to Chicago when I was 27 from like a small town. I just think it took me some time to find a community, and that did end up being ceramics, and it wasn't painting for me. So sometimes it's just where you land. Right?
From my perspective, at least, the life of painting in between shifts as a server, like that's totally normal in the arts, right? That could have gone on for ages and ages and ages because there's so many artists and creatives that are like doing hey, I'm going to do this one job because that's the consistent income. But what I really love to do is the other thing.
Totally, totally. And it actually is something that I would like to like come back to in the future. But developing the pottery side of the business, when you get you're going to give it like an honest go, it does take up a lot of time. So right now there's no time for painting, but it is something that I'd like to go back to a little bit.
When I think about your style, there's a few different things I think of, but specifically the painterly nature of so many of your different collections that you do with animals and just scenes on pots. That's clearly painting. You have to have a painting skill to do what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah. I enjoy that aspect of the ceramics a lot. And I think that was actually a bridge for me where I finally felt comfortable to throw more weight behind the pottery. It was when I figured out which underglazes are not going to run too much to be able to create paintings on pottery. And like just started to explore more painting on pottery. And sorry, I feel like it's an interview, but I feel like I'm going on. But
you're fine.
I took pottery classes for 3 years as a teen. I wasn't into soccer like the rest of my family, so my parents gifted me lessons. So I had one-on-one lessons as a teen for 3 years. And so I was already fairly decent at throwing when I joined LSP. But that person was a production potter. So he was like one dip glazes and go. And so that's sort of how I learned. I think it did just take me a long time to see those other avenues within the ceramics world. But yeah, when I started painting on pots, like that's when I was like, okay, I can do this. I love doing this. I can make this a bigger part of my life.
Do you feel like there's a time when you really just totally were like shifted, whether consciously or unconsciously looking back, going like, oh, like I identified as a potter basically at, a certain point?
When I was 28, and I'm 36 now, that is when I went back to the studio and then I never stopped taking independent study classes at that point. So probably by the time I was 29, that's when I was mostly just doing pots. So I guess I've been doing this for 7 years.
Well, I was going to say, you guys just moved. So you were at our shared studio up until
2-3 years ago.
Oh, has it been that long? Gosh.
I was at the last studio I was at for 2-ish years.
Okay.
So,
okay, yeah. Just getting a feel for trying to make your work and produce the work and put it out in the world and sell it at a community studio is one thing. At your own studio, which was still shared, is another thing. And now you guys have just moved. You have your own home studio. It's all your stuff all the time kind of thing. So what have those transitions been like?
Let's see. I was super sad to leave the community studio. I was excited too, but I think that the folks there that encouraged me along the way and saw something in the pots where I didn't completely maybe see it, like Paul Schultz and Mika Zuderweg, and even, of course, Meg Biddle, the owner of the studio. Those folks really, they gave me a lot of opportunities and they helped me see next steps. And losing the kind of constant ability to check in with somebody and ask them like, what do you think about this? Or what are you doing with your business? Was a little sad for me. The next studio I went to was much smaller. It was a collective of maybe 12 artists working in all different sorts of mediums. And then the ceramic studio was 4 people. And a lot of the folks kept different hours. So it's not like I was seeing that many people. While it was still really like a supportive place with a lot of really amazing artists, it wasn't exactly the same. But it's prepared me for working solo again. And again, I mean like as when I was painting solo. So now I'm spending a lot more time by myself. But it's weird because I think with COVID, I wouldn't be seeing anybody anyways.
Right.
It can be lonely. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but the freedom and like the kind of like peace of mind of really working alone, that's been great. The ability to fire a kiln when I need to and Like at my last studio, the kilns were constantly being used. So you had to sign up for them months in advance, maybe. Like with the oncoming holiday season, you'd sign up for it over a month before, which means and somebody would be firing before and after you. So you were tied to that time. Like your stuff had to be dry to go into that bisque. So there was some wiggle room in terms of hopping on to other folks' kilns when they weren't full. But now, just being able to go at my own pace, it gives me a lot of peace of mind, I think.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And has there been anything surprising about either setting up your own studio or just working on your own? Anything that you didn't anticipate or that surprised you? Good or bad?
Good or bad. In terms of surprises, not too much surprised me. I guess it did end up being a little cheaper than I thought, which I did not think in a million years I would say. But when we were looking for a house, we knew we were going to have a studio somewhere in the house, whether it be in the basement or the garage. So we were trying to find a house that we liked, that we could also maybe already have the electric set up. And the way I've only bought this house totally, and I didn't do a lot of the money details, but the way home buying seems to go, when you find a place, there's not always communications with the people who actually own it. And to say that we weren't sure that the electricity was actually set up when we moved in, but it looked like maybe it was. So that was a huge off the top, not having to pay for that helped a lot. And so it was a little cheaper than I thought, but it still is very expensive to set up your own studio.
Sure. Yeah. And you have just getting everybody a real life picture of what life looks like. So before COVID, you were still working part-time serving, right? At one of the...
Yes.
Which bar you were at? Yeah.
I was at the Fountainhead.
You were still there, and then you're also married, right? I always appreciate understanding a full picture of what it looks like as far as someone starting their own business solo versus someone starting their business who's in a partnership, whether just in their personal life or whatever. It all makes a difference.
Yeah, my business in terms of how I've been running it would not be possible at all without my partner. He's extremely supportive and he gives me feedback all the time, but I also don't have a driving license yet, so he drives me to all my shows.
Emilie, hold on.
Get it. Every year I say I'm going to get it. I got my learner's permit. It just expired last month and I didn't take the test, but I'm going to take it this year.
Wait, I have to just pause all ceramics talk and figure out. I know when you live in the city, I don't have a car right now, so it doesn't, it's not a massive need, but when I do need to do a really big grocery shop or something like that, I do a zip car because I can drive, I'm legally allowed to drive a car. How would you transfer? You did big shows here as far, how were you transferring all of your pieces, even just from the studio to home after a kiln would unload?
I know, it's crazy. I mean, really, it's my husband. He does a lot of the driving. I've had a couple times because he travels for work a lot too, that I've had a friend help me out.
Okay. You're in the suburbs now, girlfriend, so...
I know, but luckily we can't do anything. Luckily, unluckily. So it hasn't hindered too much of anything yet. Now that everything's online, he just drives me to the post office if I need help with anything, which is really close by. Yeah, it's awful. I don't know how I've gotten on this long, but I would like to do shows that are further away in the future because I think there's nothing like meeting your potential customers and collectors in person and expanding into different areas where nobody's ever heard of you. I think there's so much potential in that when things settle down again. So I'm going to get it. I'm going to get my license.
All right. I will table the driver's license discussion because I'll let you off the hook for now. But talk to me a little bit about what doing those markets. I know you did some of the big markets here in Chicago. I always look at those and personally just get overwhelmed with the idea of the upfront cost and manning a booth for an entire weekend or 3 days or whatever it is. What successes or what learning curve did you experience with doing those shows?
It is exhausting. For sure. I always am doing my makeup in the car on the way to the show. I always think I'm going to have time to put together a really cute outfit. And then I'm like, I'm going to have to set up a tent and be hauling all this stuff. So it's always just jeans and a top. But I think it is expensive up front. And I've heard that Chicago shows are actually my mom is a craft person too. She's a jeweler. So out east, she's been doing shows forever. And I had dinner with her and a couple of her crafter friends. And apparently the shows in Chicago are a little bit more expensive than on the East Coast. But yeah, whatever. It's 100% worth it because of the foot traffic and the ability to really get like a general idea of what people are gravitating to. If you're launching a new product and you don't want to make a ton of it, make a little bit and then bring it to a show. And you'll find out real quick if that's really vibing with people and if that's just a one-off that you felt you really had to do for yourself, or if it's something that a lot of people will find useful. I don't think the time you get to connect with people and explain your story and why you do what you do, and also the feedback, like I've gotten some really wonderful ideas from customers who come and see me at the shows and are like, I really like this, but would you ever think about doing it this way? And sometimes it's not feasible for whatever reason, but I've also gotten some knockout designs like that. So that's good. Yeah. But also, I guess if you were starting out, some tips I've learned along the way is not to I make a lot of different products for shows. I think people are walking by, so you're getting that attention for not that long. So it's best to have not an overwhelming selection of different things. I found for me, the more I narrow it down, the more people are able to be like, oh, I actually really wanted a cup. And she has 4 colors and a bunch to choose from. And that seems to be working better. Like, don't give people too many options.
Sure.
I guess. And also have a really good booth display.
What seems to qualify as good? Like design or like, I think of all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's something that I am always thinking about improving. And it's come a long way since I started. I think when I started, I just put a tablecloth down and some boxes for variance in height. And it's not exactly, I was going to invest heavily in my booth display this year, and then, everything happened. But I think you get a space that is 10 by 10, or a lot of the winter shows that are inside, you get a table that is 6 feet long. So maximizing your space with variance in height is really important, and trying to get some pieces that are eye level, because people don't really, I don't think they do it consciously, but make it as easy as possible for people to see like what you want them to see.
Yeah. From back in the day, like a decade ago when I was doing shows for photography, the thing I did right away that like I noticed what everybody else had a table in front of them. And so there was this like break between me being able to interact with anyone because I would be standing behind the table. And so you had to wait for someone to walk up to your table to even be able to be like, hey, how's it going? Because you get like a booth space. Even when it's just a table, you're not necessarily like back to back with the table behind you. And so I would make more of a U-shaped design and just stand on the edge. And so people would come and walk into the space that I created rather than just walking up to this, the physical environment of standing across a table from each other is not very personal.
Yeah.
And so I got rid of that table and would just use the rest of the square footage and like built up walls to basically have something like that.
Yeah, but you're right. Figuring out like where you're going to stand. Like my early displays, I often box myself behind things. But it really is a hard thing that it's like Tetris, and I haven't totally figured it out, because you want to make the most of your real estate. And then you also need to be accessible, but not read the customer and see if they need more or if they're just doing just fine.
So thinking pre-COVID world and someday post-COVID world, the feedback that you were getting and the engagement you were getting were enough to obviously keep doing them and to keep investing in them. Were you finding too that were you growing an audience of people that then either did your like email newsletter or your Instagram audience or something that like you were able to keep connecting with people from shows, even if sales were not as strong as you, I don't know if maybe sales were always strong. So maybe that's not even a point to make.
Oh, I've been on kind of shows. That's another thing. Like when you're looking at doing shows, I think I started to say no to more shows, but in the beginning I was always yes to everything. And that's a great way to figure out like which shows are going to work for you. But I've found that shows that are not focused on the arts, where people are going for the art, don't tend to work so well for me. Mm-hmm. But something that I did, I would say relatively early on, is I did start a mailing list, and I ask every single person who makes a purchase from me at a show to sign up for my mailing list. It's part of my checkout process. So that has helped me grow the list slowly over time. And I would just input them like at the end of a show. And it's just been there. And now I'm really relying on it. I think Instagram, and honestly, I think I keep trying on Facebook, but I get very little traction on there, but I still do it. Why not? Right. But I have a feeling like these social sites are going to really become increasingly profit driven for their own company, and that's business. But like the only way that I can make sure that they don't have to open the email, but that they even see it, because on social media, however many followers you have, you can check. It'll be like, oh, only this percentage. I haven't checked in a while because it's depressing, but I probably should. But it's at least like then people have the option when it's in their Gmail box to either look at it or not. And I put a lot of work into the emails. I don't send out I don't think they're hokey, but I try to make them engaging and fun and full of pictures that are really beautiful. I try to give my newsletter subscribers extra perks when I can think of a way to thank them. I really value the people that take the extra step with me in that way. So.
Oh, I'm hands down 1,000% on board with you as far as email subscribers. It seems counterintuitive because all of us, if you were to just ask somebody on the street, hey, do you want more emails? Everyone's going to say no. Mm-hmm. But when it's someone who's already engaged with you, who's already somehow interacted, or if it's something that you're like giving them and in return you're getting their email, that's someone who's given you permission to be in their inbox and they want whatever it is. And even if they don't want, like there's some stuff I'm subscribed to that I don't read every single time it comes in. It like automatically goes to a label filter in my Gmail. But then like once a week or once every other week or once a month or something, I go and check it because I do still want the information, but I just don't want to see it every single day.
Yeah. They can always unsubscribe if they don't want the news, and that's totally fine. But yeah, it's the surefire way to actually reach folks. Yeah, I'm always trying to work on that a little bit more. And
I think that's super smart. That's super smart. Because from a business standpoint, I think it doesn't matter if it's ceramics, if it's photography, if it's, I don't know, customized socks, like whatever. It doesn't matter what you're doing, but your email list is something you own, right? The algorithm is not going to change by you owning your email address. Like, okay, Gmail came out with the little tabs thing, so maybe it's harder to get in someone's direct inbox, but you still have access directly to that person rather than Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and everywhere else where it's like you're playing on someone else's property.
It's true. I mean, all of those platforms, I have a Etsy account and I have a proper website, and it's the same thing. Like Instagram, Facebook, and Etsy can all change whatever they want, whenever they want. And the website and newsletter list I definitely value and try to make it as beautiful as possible.
Because then it's also brand control. If you're giving them the experience of Twinette pottery, not the experience of you on Instagram. Right? Like it's your aesthetic, it's your branding, it's everything.
Yeah.
Do you still sell on Etsy, or are you only selling on your website? Or
I sell on Etsy for sure. It's like the eggs in the basket thing. My website is where people who I've met at shows who have kept up with me and a lot of folks who follow on Instagram will end up at. And it's a good place to end up because it has the most current work. And like you say, it's displayed in a way that is more me, and you can like explore the site a little bit. I publish a blog post at least once a month, and sometimes it's a recipe that I really like. And like I say, I used to work in a restaurant. Sometimes it's a cocktail, and it's a fun way to show pots in action.
Yeah.
So I try to give them a little bit more like fun content. But Etsy is like the net where you're going to get those random orders from somebody in Utah who I've never met. Like I do sometimes get these random orders on my website because I tried to have all the tags for SEO. But I think Etsy helps with just the broader net of folks. And I was talking to another crafter last night about how it would be like, how do you make the Etsy customer into a Twinette pottery or whatever your wares are, like customer? Because
Right.
some Etsy customers make the jump, but I think a lot of people on Etsy, like Etsy is the platform that they prefer to shop on. So, yeah.
So you're really thinking it's almost two completely separate audiences.
Yes, I don't have everything that I have on my website on Etsy. And sometimes I use Etsy to offload products that are maybe going to be in my second sale, like later. So you might be able to find them. They probably aren't discounted on Etsy, but it's just, I like to keep things cohesive as possible and further, like, what is it, like, zeroing in on like the essence of what I'm trying to present on my website. And then on Etsy, I think I have some pieces from 2017 on there, and there's very few, if any, on my, maybe, I still have my ocean collection on my website. But yeah, so I kind of have them separated like that. The exception of like really popular, well-selling items on Etsy, which are my wine cups, and the mugs are starting to get there, like products that I can make a lot of and pretty fast. And then when they sell on Etsy, it jogs that algorithm and it sends more people. So I have a couple items like that on Etsy, and I'll make sure those are stocked for Etsy because that's a pretty good sales platform for that. But it doesn't work for one-offs on Etsy.
It's almost like Etsy is a wholesale. When you're talking about things you can make quickly, things that are easy, things that you can, the repeat throwing kind of thing, where that's how I think of wholesale. It's like things that aren't super involved, that you can repeat very easily. That's kind of the same thought process.
That's a good point. Yeah. Just because I feel like with Etsy, you have to play their game. You have to do everything the way they want it to be. So if you're thinking about Etsy, like, do offer free shipping, or basically it's shipping included. So like figure out what that is for you. And then their algorithm is like, they make money when you make money. So if there's an item that's selling on Etsy, like they will show that at a higher rate to their audience because they want you to sell more at the end of the day. And they know that's selling. So it's figuring out that algorithm. And then I don't want to just talk the whole time about Etsy, but like figuring out, like, you know, you pull up mug on Etsy and there's hundreds of thousands of mugs. So you also have to pay more. Like, it's tricky because not every item you make is going to be able to be in that price point also. And I feel like that's the Etsy shopper a little bit. So,
I think it's super interesting because I hear so many people playing do I do this or do I do that? Do I do Etsy or do I do my own website? Do I one or the other? When really what you're saying is you can do both. It doesn't have to be an either or, but being strategic about why you're in one place versus why you're in the other place and how those function differently, and using the functionality of those differences to the best and to optimize that for your business and for your best results.
Yeah. I know there's like always every time Etsy changes things a lot, there's an exodus of makers, and I don't know where Etsy's going in the future, but I'm not like, if I'm ever at the point where I can sell all through my website and be just fine and dandy, like that would be ideal, because it is extra work to nurture both sites, because it doesn't work if you don't put work into it. In my case anyways.
Well, so how does that work for you as far as, are you doing like big batches of making where you close down your shop and then you have a big shop reopen? Or is your shop continuously opening and you're updating it and shipping things as orders come in? Or are you batching things, both either for your website or Etsy?
I'm more focused on my kind of workflow in regards to my website. So it seems to be over the past year, I've been settling into what I want to make the most. And I've always made and been pulled to make in many different styles, I guess I would say. It's all, I've had people tell me, it still looks like your style. And I'm like, okay, cool, that's good. But I'll have a whole collection of work. Like right now, I have one for my Birch Grove collection. It's going to be releasing soon. And I started making that last year and have been slowly developing and adding pieces to that. And it released in the spring and it's going to release this fall. But then I have my stoneware collection, which is mostly for the kitchen. And it's mostly just a stoneware body glazed in a really gorgeous matte white glaze that I have. And then I have the hand painted stuff. So right now I've narrowed it down to about 4 definitely distinct collections, because I just can't be one of those potters that it's just not for me. I think I would get bored if it was always the same look. But I'm trying to be organized about it. And at the beginning of next coming year, I will figure out how long I want to spend on each collection for that year and when I'm going to release it. And then they will be released in batches. But my marbled line, people seem to really dig that. It's what I lead with at the shows. So that might be part of it. But I'll make sure that I have enough wine cups to last for a little while. So I kind of am not trying to sell out when I have an update, but I definitely make a really big deal about when new work is going to be available for people. And I do release it all at once. And then that's all there'll be until, like, if it's in the spring, until the fall, or however many releases I'm doing that year. If that makes sense.
And then as the website gets updated, you update Etsy when you have a chance as a secondary.
Yeah, Etsy's definitely secondary. I think that site sort of likes to see activity on it. And it's nice not to spend the whole day on Etsy. So I'll upload 1 or 2 products here and there each day, 1 or 2 for a little while of whatever I want to have on there. And maybe I'll put something on sale that I've had for a little while. And just with Etsy, I think just the site seeing that you're active on it is good.
Like you were saying, playing to their game and their algorithms, that's what's different. It makes more sense to do a big batch upload for your website than it does on Etsy. And in some ways, if you're doing those big batch updates on Etsy, it's still the people coming then to purchase those things seem like they're already your audience that you own, for lack of a better word, right? It's the people who you're announcing to on Instagram or your email newsletter that your Etsy site is going live more than the search engine that is Etsy, because they have their own audience coming to that site.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it, I think. It's all about searchability and everything on Etsy. And on my site, it's usually people that I've met them at a show. I recognize the folks that are buying from me on my proper site, usually, which is really cool.
We're talking about COVID and all the craziness and weirdness, but that really has been the impetus to be full time for you. How has that been this year?
I mean, the positive things about that are just more time to spend on the business side of things, and also not doing shows. When I was doing shows, that was the majority of my income. I was definitely making sales online, and on my website, it was usually people who came to the show, couldn't get the item out of their head, and came back to purchase later. And then on Etsy, it was just whatever Etsy is. But yeah, I was making most of my sales in person. So being able to step away from shows, because that was not going to happen otherwise.
Right.
It's given me a chance to really develop how I want to present my work to the world, and I always knew, oh, I get a lot of inspiration from nature. Oh, I love like being outside, and I'm Canadian. I'm from rural Canada is where my family is from. So big open fields and all that finds its way into my work. But how am I going to present that? And I've found myself with this time definitely embracing the French Canadian heritage more, but in a way that's like, oh, my work is related to this. How do I share more about that? Like more of the story so that people can understand it as well. And I don't think that was totally going to happen with shows, because with shows, it's always a big deadline that you're working towards. And it was pretty stressful for me last year. I hadn't totally figured out my workflow, but it was my first. It was like every year gets a little bigger. And I was like, oh, this year is going to be the year that I had a good feeling about this year. And then COVID hit. But it's in retrospect, it's really not all bad. Before COVID, had decided to take a business class. And I think that was really helpful. Like I identified a weakness. I feel like I make pretty decent pots and I feel comfortable with my work, but I never took a business class in my life before that. So I think that all those things together helped me really define where I want things to move in the future. And so it's a good bye year, I think.
I love the fact that you mentioned the business class kind of coming as this secondary thing, because I've always found myself to be such a black sheep. Even when we would talk in the studio or I talk with other makers and artists where I start talking about systems and processes and spreadsheets and tracking, and everyone's, what?
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but that's amazing. I'm not a numbers person, but if you are, I think looking at your numbers can help so much.
Well, and I think that's a huge thing that, at least for me, 10 years in, that COVID brought. There's things where you just get comfortable or you get stuck in the routine of, like you were saying, you've got to make for these shows, and you have to do that because that's the mode that you're in. That's where the business is coming from. And so you don't have a minute to take a breath and see, is there another way of doing this? Is there a way that is more life-giving for you? Is there a way that's more in alignment with the kind of life that you want to have? And even for me this year, I was telling somebody else the podcast wouldn't exist without COVID, because I would have been barely just coming out of wedding season at this point and sleeping for days.
Yeah, you do a lot too. So yeah, it's been nice to slow down and it's like mixed feelings about the restaurant, because I complained a fair bit about having to be at my shift on time, but I got a lot of like positive social interactions at work and I have fond memories of that. So I have mixed feelings about, everybody does. It's tragic what's happening, but I'm really thankful that I've been working on this little side hustle.
Which is now, it's not so much a side hustle anymore.
It's less of a side hustle. Yeah, we'll see. I don't know how my numbers are going to like pan out. I do have an accountant because I am bad at numbers. And so he's going to help me at the end of the year, but I'm not sure where I'll be, but I'm doing all right. But with setting up the studio,
Sure.
We'll see with the kiln and all the little things that just add up that you have to purchase.
And it wasn't necessarily on your radar to give up the restaurant and be 100% full-time had this not happened.
No, I was going to find a little spot to work here. I'm in St. Charles now, and that's always a really cool way to just get to know a community too, is to work in the community. And like I say, restaurants are social places. So I was looking forward to that. But having all that time, like it really does open up a lot of time if you can focus on one thing. So that's been a huge positive for the business as well, for sure. Now, I don't know how I used to do 4 days a week at a restaurant and also do shows.
Well, is there anything that you, like any huge kind of learning curve or something that surprised you, something you wish you would have known before going all in on the ceramic side that you feel like would be really helpful for somebody else just starting?
You know, it's an art-based business, so your heart and soul, like in the pieces, should be there. Don't get stuck into arrangements like wholesale arrangements or just like maybe commissions that you aren't into, because that's just it's not going to work. I've had some pretty iffy commissions and I still take a couple, but you should find things you really enjoy making and then figure out how to price them from there. And then if you can't find a market within the price point that you need to respect your own work, then that maybe is a one-off, and keep going, but don't sacrifice what you love in the making process, I guess I would say.
Yeah, that's super important. And I think that is a beautiful place to pause and let everybody keep that hopefully close on the hard days. Just keep that close and keep on going. So.
Yeah, keep on going.
Well, before I let you go, where should everybody check out your work, check out your birchwood collection? Where are you at online these days?
So my website is Twinette Pottery, and pottery is spelled the French way, but I have all my SEO. So if you search Twinette and then pottery, regular pottery spelled, my website will still come up.
Good job.
Yeah. And then I am very active on Instagram, and I'm really active on Instagram stories. So that is a great place to find out a little bit more about behind the scenes and my thought process, and get a little bit more like one-on-one time with me.
Well, and I will link to both of those places in the show notes so that nobody has to worry about the French or the
spelling.
English.
Thank you. Thank you so
Perfect.
much. I had a really lovely time.
Thank you so much, Emily. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
That wraps up episode 105 of the Maker's Playbook. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, it would mean the world to me if you take a minute to subscribe and leave a review. It's my hope and dream to help as many makers out there build businesses that support the life of their dreams, and I can only do that with your help. Also, if you want to be sure to never miss a week of the Maker's Playbook, you can sign up for notifications at the link in the show notes. By doing so, you'll also get access to my monthly photography tips specifically for makers that I don't share anywhere else. Until next week, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Together, we've got this.